Hi and welcome to the 73rd episode of the Machine Ethics Podcast. This month is our end of year 2022 episode where I get to chat with Olivia Gamblin about the year just gone. This episode is more of a relaxed kind of ramble chat to see in the new year and for insights of the year gone past. And we seem to get through quite a few topics. We chatted about ethics boards, generative image models and copyright, who and what is represented in the images created by these models, paying artists to appear in training sets, chatGPT and when it breaks down, plagiarism, factual truth in text models, limitations of AGI, consciousness, and indeed, are you a robot? Robot rights, animal rights. We also discuss getting into AI ethics and the joke of an AI ethicist, whatever that is. If you'd like to hear more episodes from us, you can go to machine-ethics.net, or you can contact us at hello@machine-ethics.net. You can also follow us on Twitter, machine_ethics, Instagram, Machine Ethics Podcast, and if you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/machine ethics. Thanks for listening and hope you enjoy. Hi, Olivia. Thanks very much for coming on the podcast. Again, I think you're one of the, I think there's only two people we've had on twice. So I'm hoping it's a privilege, but also it's a privilege for us. So thank you very much for coming on the podcast and talking about yourself, how you've been thinking about 2022, the last year, and what's been going on. So hi.
Hi, Ben, and it's great to be back again. I'm going to say it's an honor to be back. So,
yeah. This year, I feel like has been another roller coaster for AI, certainly. A little bit less of a catastrophic year for epidemics and things, which is
thankfully
nice. Obviously, we've had a lot of things about environment and all of that sort of stuff. So hopefully people are all aware about our current global situation in that way. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about AI and AI ethics and the impact on society and all that sort of lovely things. So I know we've got a few things to talk about, but how has this year been for you and your organization, Olivia?
So us at Ethical Intelligence, we've grown our team and we have actually at a very cool kind of pivot about halfway through the year. We started pivoting to focus more on products. So before, when we first started out, we're about 3.5 years old. When we first started out, we were working in more consulting services, projects, research development, sometimes even just like a good old think tank. But when we started, there wasn't really any information in this field. It was still brand new. It was still this kind of, what is AI ethics? How would this even be applied? And over the past few years, we've done all these projects. We've collected all this what we call data, but all this information on how a company can actually practically apply ethics. And this was the year that we looked at all of our data and we went, hold on, we got some really good stuff here. We can actually start to make some products that scale to help companies. And these ones are like basic structural things. So one of the things that we did is started supplying ethics boards, which has been a very, very cool experience for us. I know ethics boards can kind of get kickbacks sometimes, but we figured out the format that works with tech teams. And it's... we describe it at times kind of like your conscience. Like if you've ever seen Finding Nemo, you've got Dory poking around saying like, I'm your conscience. It's almost like these ethics boards are used like that by tech teams where they're deep in it and they're working on it like, should I be able to use this data set, or what should I be working on or watching out for here? And they'll ping their ethics board and be like, hey, is this okay? Or what should I watch for? And their conscience comes back and says, it's all good. You're good. Keep going. Or like, wait a second, dude, wrong direction. So we like to joke around there. So it's lighthearted, but we figured out a format that worked with tech teams. So we started rolling out these ethics boards. And then we also started building up blueprints around how to implement specific ethical principles from an operational standpoint, like how to get your team and your processes set up to be able to handle trust and then make the technical decisions. So that was probably a longer answer than you're expecting there, but this year has been a really cool, pivotal year for us at Ethical Intelligence, of just growing the team and starting to focus on building out some products still doing all of our fun service research projects, but being able to channel that insight into products that can reach a wider audience.
And I think on top of that, you've also been doing, like you're saying, other stuff, but you also have an article newsletter which I've been reading and that you put out.
Yeah. We've got something called EI Insight or E Insight, and that's our newsletter. That's done by Adil. She's our head of marketing, and it is fantastic. She takes once a month a group of our EI experts and collaborates on a tech scandal that came out, and then writes about, how could this have been done better. So it's not attacking the company or the scandal or something. It's just like, here's what went wrong, and here's how we can actually make it go right. So it's that insight into, that company made a headline. Let's not do that. Let's not repeat that same mistake. And then on top of that, we have the Equation, which is our quarterly tech ethics magazine. We just had our last issue come out. It was on the business case for ethics. And our next issue, which I know is going to lead into a little bit more of what we wanted to talk about, Ben, here, is actually going to be on generative AI, since that's been such a big topic of this last year carrying into the beginning of this year.
Yeah. And how are you feeling about this subject, right? You were talking about large language models and image generation, and I guess these both come under generative AI, I guess, if you're putting this big banner on it. And we've had things like ChatGPT, which is more recent, but we've had over this year, we've had this idea that we have progressively become much better at taking a small language model, I think small inverted commas.
Small, exactly.
Small for I don't know, big 8 years ago, but now small. And matching that up with image recognition, image creation stuff that we've also been looking at. And you get this ability that we can guide images into creation, stable diffusion, all that sort of stuff. And it just feels like it's suddenly just exploded, right? Over the last year. We've had this ability to create stuff before, and we've had NVIDIA looking at how you paint scenes and interpret that into generative kind of photos with this kind of painty style. So we've had all these projects, but suddenly we're able to write something down. I want the Mona Lisa smoking a cigarette, and it would just try and produce you a thing because it's seen cigarette in images. It's had a caption saying a woman smoking cigarette, and then it's using those things that it's seen before to augment into this actually very amazing and imaginative almost imagery. So what's your gut reaction before we kind of deep dive into some things that people were saying about this stuff?
Oh gosh. Okay. So I have so much to talk about, both in terms of models like DALL-E and then ChatGPT. So you've got the image generation, you've got the text generation. So much to say in both of those. But overall, my gut reaction, and this is more on a personal level, I am challenging myself this year, since ethicists were trained to look at where are the holes first. Where are the holes? Where's the risk? How do we safeguard against that? I am challenging myself this year to actually, the first question, be asking myself, what could this technology be used for in a good way? Like, what's the cool side of this?
Okay.
What's not even the cool side, but what could we use this to do to really be tech for good, that pursuit of good tech? And this is just on a personal level of, I want to take that positive route this year. And so I'm trying to do it now with generative AI. And so my gut reaction is, wow, that's impressive technology. Look, I mean, we have to admit that it's very impressive what these models can do. And on top of that, my gut reaction, the ethicist is kicking back in now, and the risk factors, I see it as, and I'm painting broad general strokes, not to be ironic with that use of term there, but the systems themselves, it's going to be interesting to see what information is fed into those systems. Because if it's the same information, so say, take DALL-E for example, we're using images from the net, with it from the internet, fed into DALL-E, and then what happens when those images start becoming the same images that are fed back into DALL-E, what
Yeah.
kind of feedback
Yeah.
loops we're going to end up in there. So there's that concern. Also, just of course, you're feeding information into these systems. ChatGPT breaks on very certain subjects versus it's pretty strong in other areas, and you can kind of tell, okay, there was more influence, or there was more information fed and trained on in this specific subject area. Nothing wrong with that, but it's just something that we need to be aware of. And then the second part of where I am more curious / concerned, because I have this motto of curiosity this year, but curious / concerned, it's more in the use cases. What are we actually going to be using these models for? There are great use cases, and there are ones already that we've seen where you're looking at going, oh, come on, guys, really? Like, again. So that's more of my first gut reaction of, let's see what the technology can build and do, and what we can build with that technology. But let's actually be conscious about how we're engaging with this technology. That's where I think the main conversation should be happening at the moment, is how do we engage with these, since they're so new in their general access.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I've already have used it, right? So
Oh yeah, definitely.
And I had a toy example to start with. Obviously, I was using Midjourney. So there's several of these. There's DALL-E, Midjourney. There's several you can actually download onto your own computer, which is nice.
And phone.
And phone, yeah. Apps, pre-trained apps, and I think OpenAI and Google also have their own image ones, which I can't remember what they're called, but they're
Look that up after.
they're all in there. And one of the things that you were saying, right, was like, what are the use cases? I had this idea that I was going to make a poster for this upcoming event I was running, and I was typing in something into Midjourney, and I was guiding, the image in this way. So write some text. I want faces, cartoon, little game controllers, dudes, and it produced this thing, right? And it was like amazing. I was like, this is great. This is like, this will work. This will be fine. Yeah. But then I noticed at the bottom, there's like this caption or like a signature sort of thing. And you can imagine you find lots of images on the internet where there's watermarks or there's signatures or there's something, it's a normal thing to do, putting your signature or your logo or something on something. So I was like, okay, cool. I'm not just going to just use this image for my poster. It's just got this weird mark on it. And it is almost someone's signature, but it's kind of an amalgam signature.
Interesting.
So then I took it as like this jumping off point, and I had somewhat the skills to then go into Illustrator, Adobe software, and like make my own version basically, and to go, cool, this is like my starting point. I'm going to make my own poster. This is the sort of vibe I want. So at that instant when I saw that signature, right, I was like, okay, like, is this image like pretty much just someone's image, right? Or is it that the model expects there to be some sort of signature there? And I don't know what the answer is there yet. And it's like, cool, like, lots of people were talking in this way about plagiarism and stuff like that, but I actually don't know technically how explicit the plagiarism is, weirdly, in the output. Even though obviously people are talking about, stylistic stuff. But this instant of me using it and just being like, oh, I can't use this image because it's got someone's signature on it, but it's not actually someone's signature. I was like, I don't know what that is. Now I'm scared. And
I haven't heard of that happening yet. So I think I haven't heard of anyone running across like a sort of signature thing. So that's really interesting to me. But I would definitely side with you and be a little bit freaked out about, am I actually accidentally taking someone else's artwork that I had no idea? I mean, the internet is full of people and artists, and I mean, I dabbled in graphic art way back in the day too. Please, if any generative model is listening, do not take any of that artwork. It is not good. It was done in a graphic design class way back in the day, and it's funky. But So you never know. You have no idea because people have their own little blogs and maybe have a following of 5 other people, but it is still their art. And so I think the fact that there was a little signature popping up is interesting. It either says something about the need for artists to sign their own work, which is good, be able to sign our work, but or it has taken it from another artist's work, but there's no way to tell.
Yeah.
That's more of the we don't know where that's coming from, and that's where the creepiness and the questions come in. But yeah, that's funky. I haven't heard of the signature one yet.
Yeah,
You broke it.
I know, I did break it. And the other time I used it specifically, obviously, was to play around with like portraits on my face because we're narcissistic, right? Of course. And then I used it for like concept art. So I was building a thing, and I was like, I need this. I was thinking about the style, like what's this going to be, and I was like, I'll make some concept art. And the way I think about that is, one, concept art it feels like a real skill, right? So it's like it's a real skill that people have. They are amazing artists, but also the concept art doesn't necessarily get into the finished product in a way that some of the other art does. So I'm kind of torn in this idea that you could just do concept art with a generative model, or weirdly, you could just probably just Google it and or like search. Other search engines are available. DuckDuckGo it and find images which are similar to what you were looking for anyway. So this is almost like we've got this really complicated tool to do stuff that we already do in a different way. So there's, I guess, but it depends on your use case there as well. So yeah, I'm not really sure about that.
And it's lowered the barrier to being able to generate digital art or concept art, because beforehand you did have to know some type of tool. I'm sure a lot of us use Illustrator with Adobe. This isn't a promotional for them, but that's just the default for a lot of us. And that can be a high barrier to entry for people if they don't know that tool. It's a lot of buttons and they do a lot of things, and you can spend the time and effort to learn all of the shortcuts and the cool little tricks that you can do, or you can look it up online, but that takes a lot of time. Even if you're willing to invest that time, it still takes a lot of time to get that skill level up. And then to create the art itself, again, another barrier of time and effort and skill. Whereas with these generative models, you can actually get the specific-ish image. You have more role in, I really want a green tree with, I don't know, popcorn blooming on it. I can kind of generate that in a style that I want, that I can feed in. It's not exactly what I'm picturing in my mind, but I can get it close enough that I'm happy with it, and I can use it, versus if I were to Google or DuckDuckGo or Brave a different image along those lines, I can only imagine what would come up on stock imagery. That's more entertaining than anything, but it won't, again, be as close to what I want. So it's, in a way, having these generative models, generative models, you do have that level of personalization that hasn't been available before. And I mean, speaking as founder of Ethical Intelligence, we do a lot of content creation. We pull together a lot of different resources in ethics, and we get stuck sometimes of like, how are we going to depict ethics? We can't do the robot and hand touching again for the upteenth time. Like, what other imagery can we use? And so we have this conversation as a team all the time. Do we actually want to start using some generative imagery? Of course, we want to say what that imagery is and probably even list the prompt, because it's that part's interesting of how did we get to that image. But in a way, like, we're expected to do all of this content production constantly. We're tired of the stock imagery. This might actually help us get a little more creative even with the imagery that we're using.
Yeah, it's weird because it almost sounds to me like the problem there is the grind of production and being relevant and keeping on top of just being a content producer, but also the fact that for example, I know that DeepMind, there you go,
There we go.
DeepMind open source, they put Creative Commons on some of their imagery that they produced, some illustrators and 3D work that they did. And I think it's on Unsplash, it's somewhere. So you can just download that stuff. So it's also this copyright thing, right? So if it was easier to use images, if there was some images to use, you'd probably just use those images, right? You wouldn't need to generate them with this. So there's a copyright thing, which is also kind of
we need to write the rules of the road, write the rules of the copyright now. I like to think of it this way: these generative models, the engineers and the people creating those models, that is their own art form. Like for engineers, their model, that is their art form. Their code, that's their art. But that's not other people's art. Other people's art, like the painters, their art form is the canvas at the end of the day that is now being fed into these models. And so we need to have a discussion about where is that copyright, who has actual ownership over this image. I am firmly in the camp that it is not the AI's image. You can't have an AI artist that sells millions off of the art. That is a system or company behind it benefiting from the people that wrote the code and the people that created all the imagery that was fed into it. There's too much there where I don't think that is possible, and that is deeply disrespectful to the people that have both built the system and the artists that have fed willingly or unwillingly their imagery into it. But when it comes to these rules of copyright, I don't think, even though the code itself is the art form of the engineer, I don't think it's engineers or companies that should be driving how that copyright works. At the end of the day, the data that these models are being trained on is someone else's life work often. And the amount of time and effort and love and care that goes into an artist's work, that needs to be respected. So we need artists actually to be able to write these laws of copyright. And that may get a little complicated for these models, but you can't go in and say, hey, please do the purple tree with the popcorn coming out of it.
Yep.
Terrible example. You think I'd be more creative. But purple tree with the popcorn coming out of it in Olivia Gamblin's art style. I don't think I have a strong enough artistic style to actually be able to feed a system that, but say I did, say I was a world famous artist, then really that system is now taking a style that I have perfected and I have loved over years and years of development. There needs to be some type of copyright in my direction for that because that is my style. That I own that. That's like my intellectual property on a level. So there needs to be more conversation. This is not something that engineers can come in and say, it's fine, we've done all of this, it's good, like we created these models and it's separate enough from the art. No, artists also need to be in that conversation and also understand that for engineers, this is their own art form. This is the cool thing about art is it's the artist always in conversation with something. So now let's have the conversation between the artists and the engineers. Let's have that conversation. That itself will be an art form. Gotten really deep into it.
Yeah. I think I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think it's one of those devil's advocate things here. I think
of course.
If the copyright issue is so tangled, and I think if the artist, it's from which direction are you speaking? So if the artist was involved in that direction, then they probably wouldn't have their artwork as part of one of these big data sets, right? And if they did, then they probably want to be compensated in a way which made sense. And I don't actually know what would make sense. So if anyone solves that and gets back to me, that would be awesome. And I would talk about it.
I am very curious here.
Yes. How are we going to make this work? Thanks.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Because you're right, Olivia Gamblin, right?
Yeah.
Your artwork might be great, but it might be a fraction of the amount of data. When we talk about biased data or data in biasness of data sets, what we're really talking about in this way is that you're 0.0001% of the total data set is not going to influence it probably in a way that's going to make sense for like asking it to be in the style of Olivia Gamblin. So there are other things you could do. There might be a Olivia Gamblin like decoder that you like patch onto the back of the model, and it's a different system at that point, or like augmented the system. And again, you should make that. But
exactly. Great ideas for anyone listening.
Yeah, but as it stands right now, like you can ask for Picasso, right? Because there's going to be Picassos, and you can ask for like, but you're not going to be able to ask for certain people who are, not present in that data set. So you have, for example, I actually did this. If you ask for if you type in like superhero you're going to get a DC or Marvel character.
Yeah.
That's what superheroes are for the data.
A lot of images of them.
Exactly, right. There's a lot of images of them. So you do get this heavy bias in the generation of the images anyway. So you're already biasing like who gets seen almost like in that. Even though if you're asking for like something weird and obscure, it's going to give you something that it knows about, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's that we know that there's going to be bias coming into this. And I think it's just even more and more the case of artists still need to be respected and valued, because if you ask an artist to paint a picture of a superhero, they will be more creative. They're not beholden to what data set they pulled from the internet. And that I think is still important. And back to your point as well about ownership, maybe it is impossible to do the direction of being able to trace back, okay, this artist's work influenced this like pixel on on the image. But is there a system that we can build that runs complementary to something, to say Dolly's just the first one that comes to mind, but one that you can run an image check of just ensuring, okay, this is original enough, like the originality of this photo, of this generated image is not pulling like 50% or something from this one artist's work. So in the case that you had with the signature, you'd be able to run that image through another system, and that system can say, don't use this. This is literally another piece of artist's work that's been regenerated. Or no, you're good. It's not matching. There's not like kind of like plagiarism. It's like it's a 75% match with this other artist's image that they've produced. And you're like, ooh, okay, that explains the signature.
Or in that case, it can give you like a rundown of the top percentiles of influence, and then you could pay those people, pay those artists,
exactly.
Right?
I mean, there's so many different models. Yeah, exactly. There's so many different models here, and we need people that are going to work on that, because it is worthwhile, and it is something that we need to do out of respect for our artists and supporting our artists, because they're, you've got the struggling artist metaphor, but we do need to respect them. This is their life's work, and we can't just brush them off because we've decided to feed it all into these large models.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we solved it, right? That's it. We've done it.
Solved it. Done.
Okay, cool. So at the heart of the image generation stuff, there's like this language model. I was looking into, I was looking into some of the models, but if they use BERT or something, they use some way of like taking in some text, tokenizing it, and putting it into a latent space, or some space that they can then use that as a something to pass through into the image generation. So it's very complicated, but I urge you, there are some good videos on the internet talking about how Stable Diffusion works, and how we've done it in the past as well. But at the heart of this, we've had this explosion in just bigger is better language models, right? And it seems like there's not a upper limit at the moment. I don't know if there's research that shows that there will be, but we are getting larger corpuses, which and then fed into larger and larger networks of neurons or neural networks systems, which are then producing. It's almost difficult, like more correct text, which is more like what it's seen before. So we start getting large language models who can solve maths problems because it's seen maths problems before, because they're tokens and it's seen them before, and it can do moving robot arms because it's interpreting this text and it's got access to things, and it starts taking standard language and then transporting it into something useful, which might be other language, or in the image generation, it might be fed into something else. So, I think it's just it probably, we talked about this last year again, but this year is just more of the same, bigger, better. Where do you see this going, Olivia?
Well, if bigger is better, then it's definitely the American influence coming in here. We got to go bigger. We got to be the best. We got to be biggest. No, I think this is a very interesting development, because this is the first time I've seen with the large language models, and especially with ChatGPT. I can't tell you, Ben, how many people have reached out to me about ChatGPT. It's like every other day I've got someone in my inbox going, hey, what do you think of this? The interesting thing, though, is those people used to be artists when DALL-E came out, or truck drivers when they're looking at self-driving cars automation. Now I have engineers reaching out, because with the release of ChatGPT and these large language models, they can do basic engineering, and they can do it pretty well because there's a lot of examples of it online, or there's been a lot of example data that it's been fed. So the engineers kind of freaked themselves out, I feel like. And it's been interesting to see it turned back on them going, wait a second, what do we do? Like, what if this takes us out of a job? But again, back to the large language models. This has been the first time in a while that I've seen the tech community actually very, very excited. And you get people coming in saying, this is as close to AGI as we're going to get, or this is the start of AGI. I firmly sit in the camp that it is not AGI. It's not artificial general intelligence. It's just a really, really powerful large language model that has access to tons of different subjects and informations, but it's not thinking. That's what we need to stress. It's not thinking, it's correlating on information that already exists. And there's ontological trees, that decision trees that you can trace back and figure out this is where it all came from, but it's not ideating. It can only reproduce something that was already in existence, where we as humans, we have that ability for ideation. We can, for example, I really hope no one thought of a purple tree with popcorn coming out of it before. That was just me sitting there popping an image into my head, but I have no correlation for that. There's nothing that ever would hint at there being that kind of tree in existence. But I can sit here as a human and pull these crazy things together and see it. Versus the models, they have to have an instance close enough to it in the past where they can correlate and jump to it. I have a friend that he gets a lot of not joy, but entertainment in, he says, breaking ChatGPT. But he likes to figure out the questions to ask it where it can't figure out an answer. It just sits there loading. And these are usually ones where he specializes in ontological reasoning. So he's like, well, what's happening right now is I've asked a question, and the correlation between my question and potential answers is too far of a jump. And so the model is sat there trying to find a different correlation, trying to find a different logic jump or a different ontological tree to go down. And it can't. It's hit a dead end in its actual infrastructure. And so it sat there. And then it comes back usually with like, I'm a large language model. It's like, cool, I already knew that. Broke you. He likes to do that just to see where he can push it. But these large language models, these LLMs, there's potential there to do some really interesting, cool things. the question that's, and this isn't as an ethicist, this is actually and I can't claim it, this was coming from other conversations with engineers and technologists, is what is the actual use case for these? Technically speaking, very, very cool technology, really impressive. What do we use them for, though? Besides the guy on Twitter generating workout routines, not workout routines, workout. I think they're called routines.
Mm-hmm.
God, you can tell that I do not go to the gym and that I am much more a dancer than anything by that use of terminology. But how do we use this? That's more the question. And that's what I'm actually excited to see this year. Both excited, but, cautiously optimistic, where we have these cases, we have the potential to really do something interesting with these models. But we need to look at the use cases. We need to understand what the limitations of the models are and what we want to get out of them. Like, if we're just making a chatbot to have a chatbot for fun, cool. Then it's a chatbot for fun. But we can't start replacing people with this. It makes mistakes. It makes a lot of mistakes, and it's going to get better. That's for certain. But it's still not going to replace the human ability to critically think, assess, and ideate. And that's just period. That's where I put my foot down.
Okay, so humans for the win.
Hey, we can use it for creativity. Like, I was talking to this woman who, poor thing, she was like, I was asked to write for the upteenth time an article on Harry and Meghan, and I could not. I was done. These are her words. She's like, I was done with it. So I used it. So I used ChatGPT to generate an introduction just so I could kind of think about it. I was just so exhausted. And I was listening to her. I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm so sorry you had to write another article on Harry and Meghan. But yeah, let's use this as something that spurs our creativity and our ideation, like you did with the image generation, and then used it to create your own. That to me seems really kind of cool. When you're stuck in a creative rut, how do you use these systems to get you out of that rut and open up your mind a little bit more, instead of just relying on it of, well, I'll just have it write the whole article, or I'll just take the exact image, when I really actually want to produce something of my own.
Yeah, and I think we probably already do that. Like, if you wanted to write on a subject, you'd probably go and research that subject, and you would take some of that with you. If not explicitly, you might internalize some of that, right? So I think it's a really good jumping off point for that. I think also, though, it has a similar issue with the kind of, let's say, copyright, but the plagiarism aspect of it that the image stuff does, because you've now got could you give me the full works of Shakespeare, but insert something, and it would give you something, and it's like, how close is that to something which exists, that I've just kind of like, it's just presented to me, right? And there's a lot of conversation at the moment about plagiarism in terms of writing like work for schools or universities and colleges, just taking stuff directly from ChatGPT and relying on it again to be somewhat truthful, let's say, inverted commas, but like somewhat correct in the way that the correctness we're expecting to be. There's this kind of like scientific problem here of like a logic problem of what is truth and how do we define knowledge and stuff like that. But there's certain correctness that we look for when we're talking about just doing essay writing. There's obviously semantic correctness, right? The spelling, the formation of sentences, but there's also like the sky is blue, and the expectation of certain
the facts,
ontologies, like you were saying before, to be the case. And sometimes it's it's going to present us with information which is just categorically, let's say, untrue, but not what we're expecting as well.
And 2 points there. First, about the essay writing and taking just, well, ChatGPT wrote my essay. Um, I look at that and I question, really, when you do that, we've got these questions around plagiarism, and there are definitely ethical implications. But to me, I look at it, I'm like, why would you cheat yourself? That's who's going to suffer at the end of the day when you do that, because you're speaking to students, but you're assigned these essays for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
We have all been through the pointless essays that we don't like to write, but it exercises our brain in a certain way. And if you're just offloading this onto ChatGPT or any other large language model, you're cheating yourself. You're not getting that brain exercise. So that's that's one of my first points off of what you were saying. And the second one here, that you're bringing up about the different types of factual accuracy and semantics, and then I would even argue, like logical argumentation, that actually having valid and sound arguments within essays. The struggle around when something is factually untrue, when something like the system spits out sky is magenta and it's not sunset, and so you're like, okay, well, the world's ending then. But it's you're sitting there, and the sky is blue is probably a poor example because we can see it and it makes it a lot easier. But for things where I have asked a question about, like, where did the Statue of Liberty come from, and it gives me one answer, and I don't know where it came from, then I'm going to read that answer and I'm going to think, okay, well, that has to be true. I guess I'm going to trust this answer, when really it could be something completely different. But we've portrayed these large language models as these omnipotent, omnipresent systems that know everything and can tell, when that's not true. They do give incorrect information, but it's very hard when you're asking information that is outside of your knowledge base to know if that information is correct or not.
Yeah.
And so you have to take it with a healthy dose of skepticism of, all right, I have no idea where the Statue of Liberty is from, and the system's told me this, and maybe I should go fact check that just to make sure. So it's, again, general use. How are we as users engaging with these models?
Yeah, it's interesting, a point that you make there, because it's almost like, when you're using Wikipedia or just browsing the web, the web for information, you have a certain amount of expectation of what you're going to see, and its legitimacy depending on where it is, who's written it, when it was written, and all this sort of stuff. So maybe you need to have somewhat of that when you're talking about these language models as well. Yeah. I'm looking at this information, but I might have to fact check it. I'm going to read it through. It might be directly copied from somewhere. There's all these questions you've got to ask almost. Should I verbatim use this in the circumstances that I want to use it as well? Like you were saying with the plagiarism, like, is this actually going to do me a disservice in using this in this place? And I was reading earlier, actually, there's a great newsletter called The Batch. So check that out, which is all about AI stuff, from Andrew Ange. And it's great if you want to have like a weekly thing about just what's going on in AI. And the one this morning was just like people were using ChatGPT, again, others are available, to give answers for counselling questions, and then using it in a counselling context without the opt-in, the knowledge of the recipient. So it's kind of like, actually, most of the time, like you were saying before, it's like, what is the end goal here, guys? What is the use case? And are you actually doing it in good intentions, like you're saying as well? What are your intentions behind this? And are they kind of like, are you being negligent almost in presuming that this is okay? You haven't really thought about this at all, have you? And the consequences. So
exactly. And I read I think it was a company called Coco or something. They used it in that direction, and that to me was this innate misunderstanding of the importance of being able to speak and share experiences with other people. We're not trying to optimize a response. Let's get the best response. You are trying to facilitate an empathetic connection between two people. And that, life is all about the balance. If you optimize for a certain specific aspect or metric without concern towards what that does of the balance of the system or the balance of the use case, then it gets thrown out of proportion. Of sure, they may have optimized for the best possible response to someone's mental health query or concern, but that wasn't why the person was there. And so that optimization has thrown the use case and the system out of balance. Yeah,
Definitely. Awesome. I feel like we didn't solve that one, unfortunately.
No, but I think, that one is still a giant question mark. And like I said, this year I am taking a positive approach to things. So I am waiting to see how things develop, and I will sit and chat with people and about use cases. I'll be much more vocal about use cases. But for now, I want to just see how the technology develops and keep the respect of it's a very, very impressive piece of technology, but it is far from being general intelligence, and it is still a far cry from being anything close to what the human mind is capable of.
I just wanted to pick quickly on that thread, on the general AGI thread, as you bring it up. What that again is kind of like an intention. It's a cultural artifact. It's a dream. It's all these different things. How are you feeling about that idea in 2023?
I am feeling about AGI the same way I have always felt. My perspective on AGI hasn't changed, even with the depth of, as I get deeper into this space, as I understand better from people's perspectives, how they define AGI, how it works. To me, and my definition of what general intelligence means, it's not correlation. It's not something you can find in neural networks. Because for me, AGI or just general intelligence, let's put it there, is more than facts on a page or pixels on a web browser. It includes the ability to take in emotion and feel emotion and experience that emotion. It's the ability to interpret the world around us. It's the ability to go beyond just this has been written and put on the web, but actually I can sit here and I can look out my window and I can take that information and I compare it what's on the web. I have no limitations to the input I can take, versus with artificial intelligence, there will always be a limit to the information it can intake, because it can't possibly sit there and then fly to, I don't know, go to a different part in the corner of the world where there are no computer screens, there's like remote part of this world, and intake that information that it finds out there, where I can. Granted, with a couple different, like there's a couple barriers to entry on that, but like I do not have those limitations, and I can seek input that is not just, excuse me, I got excited. I started talking too fast here. Like I can intake information that is not just something I can see with my eyes, or I can hear. I've got smell, I've got taste, and sure, those sound funny, but that's also still input. And I can sit here and sure, Ben, we're communicating through Zoom right now, but I get this understanding of like who you are as a person. I understand your personality. I have layers and layers of, I'm just calling it input right now because we're talking about AGI, but layers and layers of input that are so detailed and minute and intricate that I firmly believe, just the way that we develop artificial intelligence, it's not possible to capture those layers. It's not able to, we are not able to capture that intricacy. And I'm only talking about input. I haven't even talked about like output, meaning things that I can do and influence in the world around me, where, AI, it's not like it can pick something up and drop it and see the cause and effect. I can.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I look at, and I'm like, by my understanding and definition of AGI to me is a system that has the same capacity as human, and I just don't think that's possible.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it's possible. So that's never changed on my perspective, and you're also getting some of my personal philosophy of how I view human life and how I view interactions with the world, and my innate understanding of what it means to be human. Mm-hmm. So I know I'm influencing this with my own perspective, but again, that's my perspective.
Yeah. I think I feel I think more abstractly about this subject, whereas AGI might be this like super intelligent human shaped ethereal being, right? Which could suddenly become as intelligent as humans, and we say intelligent, but we could do stuff that we expect humans to be able to do. Like that for me is kind of boiling it down, because otherwise you get this semantic soup about like, what do you actually mean here? And then surpasses us, like can keep going and doesn't have these boundaries that we biological beings do. I feel differently. I feel like genetics produced this situation, and it could be that we could create a artificial genetic situation. And I think things could happen. It's just that we don't necessarily know how it could happen, and it could look much different to humans, and it could be much more alien. So we produce, a slime mold which is artificial. And you know what I mean? Is this like
exactly.
We could do cool stuff, and it doesn't necessarily have to be constrained to this idea of a human being type thing, but in a computer. I feel like it could be more like you've literally got a cat that that the type of intelligence we're talking about. It can do stuff. And it sort of knows it can do stuff. And I think that's where it all boils down to the fact, like, we can make programs do stuff and autonomously do stuff, but they don't want to do stuff. Like when we turn the computers off, we don't feel bad about it, right? But we turn a cat off and we feel bad about it.
Poor cat.
So there's this internal life situation, this autonomy, this internal dialogue going on. And that is what, for me, we're trying to get to grips with in philosophy, especially. But like, as in engineering, like, what does that look like? And that's a lovely. I think that's the amazing Venn diagram there, which is exciting to me, but it doesn't necessarily look human either. Which I find is more interesting because it can explode out the possibility space a bit more.
I think we also sit there. How do you determine if something has an inner life? Because that I do think is a big caveat for us. And it's the catch-22 where I'm thinking, okay, if they, with ChatGPT or any of the other large language model generative text systems out there, we need to learn the names of them, Ben, so that we can reference different ones.
It'll be in the show notes, all right? That's how it works.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
But if I sit there and they've released constraints on it so that it can, right now with ChatGPT, and that's the one that I've played with, so that's the one that I'm referencing. If I ask it any emotions or anything like that, it responds like I am just an LLM. If they remove that restriction and I say, can you feel? Do you have an inner life? And it responds yes. Is that actual indication, or does it just know that is the response to that question? So you're stuck there in this catch-22 and you're like, no. I mean, this is the philosophical thought experiment of our day of does it have? Does the large language model have an inner life, or did it just pick it up in the data? Who knows? I don't have the answer for that. I just think it's a funny thought experiment that we're getting stuck in. Yeah,
it's cyclical, definitely. And I think the answer is probably no, but I also don't know when the answer will be yes. So that's the issue, isn't it? Yeah. So
what's the tipping point? How do I know that you have an inner life, Ben? You could just be on like a robot. I don't know.
Well, I think that is think that's the crux, isn't it? It's behaviorism with dualism and all these different ideas of like, self, like what is the being that we are, and if it's like the duck analogy. If it sounds like a duck and it looks like duck, it's probably a duck. So you're going, and they say that about pornography for some reason, but if it does human stuff and it sounds human, it's human. And that's sort of, if you look back at Alan Turing and his seminal papers on this sort of subject and the Turing test, this sort of, he was kind of like thinking in that terms, like we might as well think of it in that way if it kind of displays what we think of as human attributes, then how are we to discern? But I think obviously we've grown up, we've done some stuff since then, and I don't disagree with him. I just think that, is there never going to be a way to check? Or are we always going to be stuck in a situation where we are essentially, I'm believing that Olivia Gamblin is a sentient being, in the way that we think of as a being with inner life, inner actions, inner autonomy, that sort of thing. Or are you a robot? Or are you a automaton?
I'm secretly an AGI, and I just don't want anyone to find out, and which is why I say no, this can't exist. I think there's an interesting point here, though, Ben, and this is me as a skeptic.
Mm-hmm.
This is me coming from a point of skepticism of, again, that belief that there's something so innately different about human nature. But what if, here's the philosopher coming out.
Yep.
What if we actually did look at these systems and ascribe some level of humanity to these systems? What would the implications be for our behavior with these systems? How would we treat them any different? Would we use them in any other different use cases? Would this be, we still approach it as this is technology, and maybe with some of the systems we need to take a different mindset and approach, and even if there is no human essence, because I can't possibly say that even in a thought experiment, it makes me cringe. But again, this is my personal bias. Yeah. Then what would that shift in mindset change about how we approach our technology? I think maybe that is an interesting thought, just thought case of what would that lead to?
Yeah, I think that actually harks back to one of our an episode for a couple of years ago with David Gunkel and the whole robot rights and things like that. And part of his argument there is that actually the way that we treat animals and the way that we might treat artificial things, robots, let's say, does change ourselves more than it can necessarily change the thing. It changes how we react to the thing. And the classic example is like shouting at Siri or Alexa. It's like, Alexa, turn the lights on. It's like, and teaching your children that this is okay and that you can have, maybe nicer language and you speak to people in a certain way. And,
I have to admit, I have been yelling at Alexa. My mom and I have been yelling at Alexa over the Christmas holidays because Alexa is programmed to play, and I'm looking at the one in the kitchen because I think it might actually start playing Mariah Carey's Christmas by default.
Yeah.
I thought it would start playing, but I figured out that if I asked it to play Christmas music, it would just default to that Mariah Carey, and so I would do it from the other room, and then I would hear my mom, Alexa, no. So, complete side tangent, but
good for gags.
Oh, and I think I woke up the corgis too.
Oh, no.
You can hear them in the background.
Okay.
And they're a sweetheart, and they both know that they're corgis, and they have an inner life, I am convinced. I'm good to tie it back to the conversation. But yes, they're awake and...
Yeah. So kind of lastly, I anecdotally got asked a lot of questions about how I got into AI ethics, how I think about a career in data ethics, what the new sector of tech ethics is, and I feel like I don't necessarily feel qualified to talk about that, and it's amazing that it's just suddenly happened. I think in the last few months, I've had like, I want to say tens, but it's probably like five different separate things coming in from different directions about people, mostly students who are interested in this area. And for me personally, I think it's great, but also I don't necessarily know what to tell them. So do you have any answers for these sorts of people?
Yes. And I've been seeing the same thing. I get, when I started out, I had like one or two very random emails of, hey, what is an ethicist, or how would I do this? Now I feel like it's every week almost, just someone reaching out either about their research or actually how do you make a career in this space. And it's usually students. And to me, that's very exciting to see if we've got this workforce coming in. We've got this fantastic workforce. It also shows the importance of this space, especially for future generations. So wake up, older generations. This is something that we need to actually take seriously. And I do see it taking the same trajectory as the role of an AI ethicist. I do see it taking the same trajectory as data science. I think it was about 30, at least 40, we'll say 50, just so I'm safe in terms of my calculations of time. Data scientists did not exist, period.
Oh yeah,
And
it's really recent. Yeah.
exactly.
Sure.
Really, really recent. And then it built up quite quickly, but built up over time where, the first few people were calling themselves data scientists and getting funny looks. We've had the same thing with AI ethicists. The first few people were getting funny looks. I remember I have had so many funny questions when I was first starting out of what in the world is an AI ethicist? Why? What is this? To now where it's a recognized title and people are looking to get into this space and how to work under this title and how to be an AI ethicist. And I say time and time again, 5-10 years down the line, I would say more towards 5 years down the line, this is just going to be a position that companies hire for, point blank, or they're going to have their full stack ethics solutions and they're going to have their ethics departments. I'm watching as companies build out their ethics teams, and a lot of the tech companies just laid off their ethics teams, but I think that's more indicative of how the management of those ethics teams and those companies worked, not the actual ethics teams' contribution to the company. Because there's still a lot to be worked out in terms of where's the budget, where's the responsibility and leadership and say in a company that an ethics team has. So I'm going too far down off the track of the original question. But to get into this space, I love this space. I think it's fantastic to work in. It's fascinating. It's quickly growing. And so if you've got a curious mind, it is the perfect place to be. You are at the crossroads of so many different thoughts and ideas and sectors. I mean, as an ethicist and as an AI ethicist, I have to stay up to date on technology developments, but also I have to stay up to date on political developments and regulation developments, and I have to stay up to date on ethical theory. And I love talking with psychologists because that influences my work. It's just such a cool crosshair of so many different sectors. And so, exactly, it's like, ooh, where are all these coming from?
Yeah.
But when I talk to someone that is just getting into this space, I usually ask them, are you more interested in researching and diving into problem definitions and like, do you want to sit in the library and read text and analyze and look at data and try and figure out, well, this is the problem that we're facing? Or do you want to be at a desk and be designing solutions and looking at, okay, we found the problem, but then how does it look like to actually solve this problem and do it and be very practical in your application? I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're just very different choices because you've got the decision to make of, do you want to focus on academia? And our academics put in so much research and very, very important work in terms of just these ethical concepts and principles and what they mean. And they're starting to turn around case studies as well. So do you want that academic track, which is a very important track? It's based on research. Then you're looking more at think tanks, academia, traditional academia. And that is a direction where you're much more in the theoretical, and that fits for some people. And then other people, it fits in, I want to be much more practical. And in that case, you are looking for ethics teams and internships there, but also branching out beyond just the term ethics. You've got responsible AI teams. A lot of times, what this is called in the tech industry is responsible AI. It is ethics, AI ethics in practice, but responsible AI is a lot less scary of a term, apparently, than ethical AI. So we go with responsible AI. Fine.
Yep.
Then you're looking for responsible AI teams, or like privacy and trust teams, or explainability teams. Like you're looking for specific principles that you want to be practically designing solutions for. So there are two tracks, and then there's the rare few that kind of sit in between both those tracks. And I would say that I'm one of them, meaning I spend most of my time on the practical side, but I do love my academics, and I do love my research. So I will work with other academics on research papers. So there's way to do both. But what I tell people is start looking for internships. If you want to go that practical route, start looking for internships, get involved with communities like All Tech is Human has a fantastic job board. Or as well, here's a subtle pitch, ethical intelligence. We have what's called the EI Expert Network. We look for people with master's degree and above, or 5 years of experience and above. So we do have some qualifications there in terms of being an expert to join that network. But one of the reasons we set up that network, and it's become such a vibrant community, is I saw this surplus of people that wanted to work in this space and didn't have an avenue, didn't know how to do it. So part of what we do with that expert network is both have the community building where people in this space can have someone to go talk to, but also be able to connect those that want to work in practical application of ethics, bring them onto projects where they can actually execute there. And so start to make either a transition fully into a career in responsible AI, or have that outlet that they're looking for beyond just their academic career or their independent career.
And I'm guessing that there's a presumption that we're making is that this is not going away, right? This is something that's grown up quite recently, but with the prevalence of AI and these tools, and even some of the stuff we're talking about today, which is quite, in the last year has just been blowing up, generative images and stuff like that. It has a bit of what you have talked about, like it has a bit of law in it, it has a bit of like philosophy, it has a bit of, just data science in it. And
Everything.
you've got to, kind of pull on these threads, see what excites you about it, and then, go down that line, try and join these communities, and I guess make a difference at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was like joking about this stuff back in 2015 when I was just starting to think about this area at all. I was talking with someone at the Digital Catapult in London, and we were joking that with all the automated car stuff and all the other AI things that were coming through, wouldn't it be funny if we had AI ethicists? Wouldn't that be hilarious? And and we were like chuckling about it. It's like now, 6-7 years on, it's no joke, guys.
I kid you not, Ben. When I was in high school, it must have been like my senior year of high school, because I was trying to figure out, as you do your senior year of high school, which in America you're 18 and no clue what you want to do with life. I'm sitting there going, I must decide everything that I want to do in life now. And all of my life has come down to this decision of what I'm going to major in college. If anyone's listening that is of that age, that is a complete and utter lie. So don't worry, you have plenty of time to figure things out. Even beyond that, you have plenty of times to change and figure things out. But I remember we had a family friend over, and I was saying like, oh, I really love philosophy, but I don't really know what to do with it. So I don't think I'm going to major in philosophy. Spoiler alert, I did major in philosophy, but he said like, oh, you know, there's these things called medical ethicists that exist at all these hospitals, but
Yeah.
you know, there's this thing called a tech ethicist that's coming out of that, like a tech AI ethicist. It's kind of like a medical ethicist, but it's for technology. I remember sitting there listening and going, dude, you're crazy. What? Like, what do you mean that? No, I don't want to do that. Why would I want to do that? And that's not even a career. And what do you mean? And then
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't exist yet, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And then I remember 4 years later, my senior year at in my undergrad, my bachelor's degree, um, I was in an innovation class. I my minor's in entrepreneurship. One of my minors is also in entrepreneurship. I'm in an innovation class, and we had to come up with ideas for business. And I kid you not, Ben, I found these notes just recently, about in the last year or so. I found these notes. So I'm cleaning out my computer, my hard drive, my notes from this class, and I had the 3 company ideas that we had to do for this innovation class. I kid you not, I come down to the third one, and it says, well, what if I had what about like a network of ethicists that I was able to bring into companies and give them the ethical guidance in creating their technology? And I remember reading that, and I was like, oh, come on, seriously. It's just been something that's echoed, that I have laughed at multiple times in my life, but have now echoed and come to fruition. Yeah, so that's been kind of my path, both as an ethicist. I started off going, what the heck is this? To what if I make a company out of this? No. Also, my teacher thought it was a terrible idea too. So here we are. Now to present day, where I'm giving young people advice on how to start getting involved, and trying to encourage them, if please get involved, come into this space. We are so shorthanded on talent, and the need for it is just going to keep growing. So very cool place to be, growing career area. Don't let the current tech layoffs scare you. Those are going to come back around, and I'm very, very hopeful, and this is here to stay.
Yeah. We're going to call it a day. This has been amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I know it's very early for you where you are in the States at the moment. So thanks very much again for spending this time with us. I was just going to say that actually I've been doing quite a lot of lecturing recently. So if anyone does need a day or a session with their students, it's usually design students or computer science students that I do a lot with. For some reason, is that something that you guys do a bit of as well?
Yes. So we're actually going to be running the master class for the data lab up in Scotland. They've got what is the full name of it? They've got the Data Academy. Excuse me. They've got the Data Academy. We're running, and that's all students. I think it's master's students, if I remember correctly. But we're running the master class on data ethics. We've worked with a couple of PhD students in the past, or like research projects coming out of universities. So we do a lot of teaching and what we call training in terms of students in universities and academia. But we are actively trying to figure out how to create, how do I explain this? So the expert network is for people that are currently active and working in responsible AI, but we have a lot of students that are fascinated by it and could learn a lot just by being able to shadow or be able to pop into some of these conversations. So we're actively looking at this year, how do we create maybe a shadow program or a cohort of people that can come and see, oh, this is what it's like to sit in on an ethics board meeting and how an ethicist works in action. So we're trying to figure that out, Ben. Long story short, we're trying to figure out how to make it a little more open to aspiring and growing talent in this space.
Cool. Awesome. That's really good to hear. Olivia, thank you so much. How do people find you, follow you, contact you?
Well, on the net, as I said earlier, because I called it the net and I realized as soon as I did that, I need to, my nerd is showing, or mom's on the net style influence there of that YouTube video. Done with that tangent. Clearly, I am in need of my second coffee for the day. But you can find me personally. I've got my own website. It's just oliviagamblin.com. You can connect to me. You've got my Twitter and my LinkedIn are both connected to that website. It's probably the easiest one to point you to. If you want to check out what we do with ethical intelligence, you can find us at ethicalai_co on Twitter or ethical intelligence on LinkedIn. Those are two main social channels, but we've also got a newsletter. It's called E-Insight, literally spelled E-I Insight. And we've got The Equation, which is our digital magazine, and a couple of other different resources. Blog. We're relaunching the podcast, so more podcasts, Ben. But we've got a lot of resources, so check us out actually just at ethicalintelligence.co, and you can find all of these resources and where to sign up to them if you want to follow some of our work as the company.
Thank you so much, and I'll speak to you soon.
Sounds good. Good to talk to you, Ben.
Hi, and welcome to the end of the podcast. Thanks again for Olivia Gamblin for coming to chat with us. If you'd like to hear more from her, you can go to episode 42, where we discuss probability and moral responsibility. Like we said before, I think this year has been a bumper year for image models and text models really blowing up and allowing us to demonstrate and see and in fact just touch and interact with use cases and the general public getting into the action using the output of these models. So that's been really, really interesting for me to see, and really lush to have this time to discuss it with Olivia. Hopefully in future we'll do a proper deep dive on foundational models, text models, and we'll get back to you on that one very, very soon. As previously mentioned, if you're interested in reaching out to myself or indeed Olivia, then please do for getting hold of us for consultation, talks, lectures, all that great stuff, all around AI ethics and all the things that we like to talk about on this podcast. Thanks again for your support in 2020. We have a few things lined up already in 2023, but I'll be really fantastic to hear what you have to say and what you'd like to see with the podcast. So please do get in contact at hello@machine-ethics.net. And again, if you can, support us on Patreon /Machine Ethics. Thanks again, and see you next time.